I'd like to go over a couple of the topics that came up in the last color class. On the left of this screen, you have one of the Manet paintings, these beautiful treasures that I want to share with everybody. And if you haven't heard of them or seen them, I'm really excited to show more pictures of them at the end of this slideshow. And on the right is an example of what happens in the last class, which is we made these value charts and from the selection of paper that we have, and we also glued shapes and negative shapes down. In addition to those two projects, we started the class with a exercise with negative shapes in tote bags where we couldn't look at them and didn't know what they were. And we were expanding our sense of touch and our discovery of color with respect to touch. And then at the end, I discussed a Manet painting and tried to discuss color a little bit in terms of shape when looking outside of a window. So I'm just going to go over each of those topics. And of course, since this is a slideshow, PowerPoint video presentation, just pause the video whenever you want to take some extra time with some of these topics. So this is a slide that just shows the topics that happened during class. So the first exercise is really just coming right off of the first exercise from the first class. And my idea with this is to engender and really pronounce how informative and important and beautiful it can be to approach the visual, to approach painting, drawing, and art and this kind of retinal legacy from another angle. And it can be very surprising, for example, to simply close our eyes and touch a negative shape and describe that to ourselves and describe that to a friend and write about it and then trace it with our fingertip and hold it. And it really changes the way we might look at shapes. And it's a way of getting to know the visual is actually to take the visual out of the equation. And so with this class, I try to continue to bring that up. And what it forces is the poetic and using language. And a lot of our experiences of beautiful art seem to start with the visual, but how quickly do we leave the visual, right? Like how long do we continue to look and absorb colors and shapes and lines before our mind and our emotions start to run with those? So that's the whole point of doing these projects. So just to lay out exactly what happened for those who weren't there and want to try it out at home, I I gave everybody a negative shape in their tote bag and they couldn't look at it. And I said that it was an animal, that it was a negative shape of an animal. And that's the first challenge. Rarely in life are we presented with the task of only experiencing the negative of a thing, even though it's very quickly apparent when we go to make art that the negative is formed by the positive and the positive is formed by the negative, right? That these are interlinked notions in when it comes to drawing and painting at least. So you were each given a negative shape and told that it was an animal, and then we wrote down some words or sentences and just kind of experienced that together, what it meant to find something out through touch in the context of a color class. And then I showed the positive shapes, and we were able to guess from our ideas what the animal might be. And like my hope with this is that we come up with a poetry around talking about shape. Like, is it hard to hold? Is it easy to hold? Is it a confusing shape? After 3 inches, there was a sharp turn, similar to when I come home in my car and my driveway sweeps to the right. Just kind of really making shapes personal as we know them. It fits like a shirt. It fits a little bit too tight, like the shirt that I want to replace for another one. Or I'm just talking off the top of my head, but that was the idea. And Yeah, that was that exercise. So after that, we dealt with the deceptively simple project of making value charts. And this is just to continue to review kind of our three pins for the class in terms of terminology, which can be very confusing. And please don't feel worried if it's been difficult or has felt like it hasn't fit very well. So our three main terms are hue, saturation, and value. And the one of the issues is that in common language throughout the day, these all have very different meanings than they might have in an art context, right? And they tend to kind of be slippery and move back and forth. But what is so difficult about making these value charts for many who have not taken art classes before or haven't thought too much about the structure of color is that we have preconceptions about intensity and value and hue, and those kind of get in the way of the actual, or they inform it and make it more dense, so to speak. But they are misleading sometimes also, and that can be surprising. For example, we might think that a very saturated color is going to be brighter than a desaturated color, even though the desaturated color is actually darker in value. So there's this kind of play between this triangle of terms. And then at the end of that project, we applied smartphone technology and we took pictures of the images. So this is just a slide to help us remember. On the top, we have hue. And so these are just the nameable colors, a red or a green or a pink or a blue. But often when we think of hue, it's the most saturated version of that color. So it's the color that is portrayed on the color wheel often. So that's our hue in the top row. And then in the middle row, we have just a very simple example of a value scale of steps of value from an extreme dark to an extreme light, and the steps in between there. And in this case, on my screen at least, it's a kind of a cool white that this black is going towards. And then the third row down is our third color term, which is saturation. And this slide shows desaturating from right to left, a red into a gray. Now, I've shown other slides before. What's beautiful about saturation and what adds a particular dance to it is you can desaturate towards a white, you can desaturate towards a black, you can desaturate towards another color. So it has this added complexity where as you add green to red, right, you are diminishing the brightness of the reddish quality and you're bringing it towards green slowly. And so until it's fully green, you're desaturating the red. This is how I think about it. And on the right is an example of a value chart and or value strips of paper laid in rows, and at the bottom is a dark and it's going to a light. So that's what we're working on in class right now. And so on the far right of this slide, you have pale. And I just want to clarify that in that last image, this isn't necessarily correct. This was an attempt, and it's going to look different on your screen. So don't imagine that this is the correct example of going from dark to light. And in fact, part of this exercise is to realize that a correct version of light to dark is very sensitive. Depends on the light bulbs, the fluorescent, the incandescent, natural light, the angle you're looking at the paper, and not to mention these screens. So the more sensitive we get to this, the more things are going to shift and be mutable. For example, this is an iPhone filter where it's been desaturated to a particular gray, right? The smartphone technology has different algorithms applying to the light intensity. And so you have filters like mono or noir, or I think there's even just a black and white. And so this is one of those. And so we can see that as a reference, but that doesn't mean that it's right and your particular arrangement of your value strips of paper wasn't correct. It just helps us see that there is a way of separating color from value. So for example, on the right, there's an intense yellow strip. And to our eyes, so this is where we can really get into the rhythm of color and the way it defines something as separate from something else. So this intense yellow is it's richer than the pale yellow above it, and so it's been delimited, it's been delineated, uh, demarcated from the pale yellow by its different in intensity and hue. Right, the pale yellow goes towards green, but when we look at the black and white slide, the differences are seemingly there are no differences. So I like to think about this as if your finger was traveling across this, on the left it would be smooth, but on the right you would feel a jump in this color difference, or a step in this value difference maybe. Um, so that's just talking through using the language. Here's another example. Again, you can pause on these and and consider them. And so then for the kind of third exercise, where we actually get to collage and glue and think about shape, we took our original animal shape that we guessed from in the first class, in the beginning of class, and we traced some portion of it on a piece of paper folded in half, so that when we cut it out, and we needed a closed shape because I needed it to be a negative and a positive, a full negative and a full positive shape. So then when we open it, we get a kind of mirrored Rorschach type image. And again, a lot of these exercises I'm creating are to take out all of the stuff, all the insecurities around how to make art, and that you need all this kind of perspective. I'm just trying to create exercises where you might make, and also big exercises where you might make something that you wouldn't expect yourself to make. Um, so there's an angle I'm dealing with about virtuosity in this class. So just to be transparent about that. So if you make these shapes that you might not have made before simply by tracing our plastic cutouts, and then you open it, and then the idea was I asked you to choose two colors, and this is where we're flexing our language skills. So I said choose two values that are really close together, but the hues are really far apart. So, for example, this student here, this was from last week. She had a green and an orange, and those are in fact on her color chart. Those were colors that were relatively the colors are far on the color wheel, so to on some poles, orange and green. What do those have to do with each other, right? They seem kind of distant compared to at least like a yellow and orange. Um, and yet the values are quite are close compared to some other values that she could have chosen from her color chart. So we have values that are close, but colors that are far. So I know it's a little bit of a brain freeze, but it's worth it to flex our skills like this. And then if you had enough time, the idea was to choose another two parameters. And so this could just be a working process for mixing it up in your studio, or when you're thinking about colors. Okay, choose two colors that are really close in hue, such as on the bottom left here, choose the fish and the background of the fish. You have an orange and a pink. Those oranges and pinks seem kind of close in color, right? In hue, whether you think about a color wheel or not. And I'm trying not to think about the color wheel too much because there's so many versions of the color wheel throughout history. But in general, if we think about those hues as close and the values as close, what happens to the edges? That's all I'm saying really with this class is how are edges related to these three: value, color, and value, hue, and intensity. So if we look at the top right corner with the fish, we have the purple and the orange. Those are colors that are further apart. They seem to have less to do with each other than the way that the orange and the pink rub up against each other. And so in that way, the shape of this fish is defined by those differences. So then finally, I just want to bring all this to bear. Oh, one other thing to keep talking about that we talked about last class that can be really exciting is what does this do to space? And so we can think about kind of the space or the quality of air that this fish resides in. So like how far does the space go back or forward? And as these shapes get sensitive to color, the edge of the tail might appear to bend in simply by the shape and the way the color is defined. Without even, these are just they're just plain color fields. There's no modulation in this orange, but it can appear modulated, or the tail can appear modulated based on color mixing and the amount of turns and the rate of turn of the shape. And then I just want to talk about something really beautiful that is close to home for me, which are these Manet paintings. And so since this is a video, you can just pause these at any point. I'm going to kind of rifle through them really quickly. And this is going to be my shout out to libraries. So if you try to find, I just want to promote libraries. So if you try to find versions of these on the internet and Google search, which is what I already had the book of Manet's Last Flower Paintings, this beautiful book. But if I was like, oh, well, I'm making a presentation. So I tried to search on Google and then download the images. And it's just such a mess. Every time I try to find, not every time, but a lot of times finding quality images of special artworks, you don't know if they're copies or if the color has been corrected differently. And so we have this wonderful resource of Interlibrary Loan where we live. There's the Monterey Free Libraries plus the Monterey Library, Pacific Grove Library, and you can order books on the internet and get great reproductions. And it's just such a joy to be able to have some art books at home to look at while your water is boiling before you go to work or what have you. So these are all pictures from the late Manet painting book. I'll go through them very quickly, and you can pause the video at some point. And then I'm going to talk about one of them in terms of what we've been talking about. So I'm going to stop at this one. I could stop at any of them and discuss color. So hopefully you can see my cursor here. And let's just talk about the bracketed hue world of greens. So how far is Manet able, how much mileage, so to speak, in terms of intensity and value is Manet getting in this bracket of greens? And how can we talk about that? So first of all, if we look at the left slide, which the right slide is a detail of, and we look at the leaf on the left side that's pointing outside of the picture frame, and if we just pay attention to the subtle shift in the bottom portion of that leaf to the top portion of that leaf, and even this little swatch of color right here. So now that we're learning about color a little bit, we can say that the bottom portion of that leaf it's still in the green world, right? But it's darker in value and it's richer in intensity. It has more intensity. So the upper portion, this fold in this leaf, has been shifted down in value and in intensity, I would say. And then the tip of the leaf grows warmer and lighter, but seems to maintain a similar intensity of color. And so what we can do, similar to what we did in the beginning of class, where we traced our finger along the negative shape without seeing it, if we trace our finger along the shape of this leaf, how clear or how does it express itself? And so it's a harder edge for me on the bottom. And as I make this slight turn up, it softens and it becomes a haze. It becomes like the fog of where I live here, this kind of misty marina. And it becomes hard to place as I get near the brightness of this pink. This pink kind of interacts and pushes that leaf down into space. So I'm just playing with our terms as I look at the poetry of this painting and kind of share how I think about these things being able to unravel and re-ravel in front of me. So if we look at the right portion of this kind of pile of greens of different leaves, and so if we go from the middle petal, the middle purple petal on the bottom, and we scan, we drag our eyes to the right, and that dark purple shape, that really dark, one of the darkest darks in the painting, right? Playing with the darker darks. We hit that bright, not like seafoam green, but definitely like a cooler, pale, but fair. It appears rich in this painting because Manet kind of twists things where even the pales feel rich, even the whites. He kind of he's incredible to look at in terms of how he deals with desaturated lights. So so if we look at these cool soft pale greens of these painterly leaves, then they hit that warm stride, right? And you could think about this like if you're sitting under an awning at a restaurant and you know that if you have milk, a glass of milk, you would pull that into the shade. So you have the difference between the cool of the seafoam green style emerald, desaturated emerald colored patch, and it hits this warm green area. But that if we compare the warm of that green to the original leaf that I was talking about, it's a very different it's a very different world. We're in a whole nother time of day almost if we allow ourselves to localize to this degree, right? If we allow ourselves to zoom in. And again, I think the metaphor of an ant crawling across the edge of these things is really pertinent or informative. So if an ant crawls through this, it's very lost. There's no uh, it's like a kind of absorbent dark velvety fabric where you can't quite see the folds. Whereas when we get up to this kind of sharp triangular leaf, we can see the folds, right? That's a creased pillowcase versus a kind of flannel pajamas. So that all has to do with the edges and the color with relation to each other, which is what we're learning from Albers from the beginning. And so there's this kind of lost and found in color. And part of that, so just to bring Albers home a little bit, is if we take the triangular leaf, the right side of that leaf, the background is a paler gray. Maybe it helps to look at the detail that I have on the right. So the background on the right side of the triangular leaf is a lighter gray of a similar intensity, maybe slightly less intense than on the left side of the leaf. So there's this incredible subtlety, even though a very relaxed, loose impression is conjured. And maybe I'll just end with looking at if you just look at the right and left side of this painting, we could describe those colors now with the terms we've been learning. So on the left side, you have it seems like it's the same value, but it's hard to tell because it's been separated by this vase, but it has more of it's a different color, right? We're in a different hue world, but it's close in color. Maybe we have like a purple into green thing going on. So that wasn't as eloquent as it could have been, but at least I'm sharing my way that I've learned to open these up and close them down and use the terms of color uh, as I know it.